Hey, just want to start off by asking how everybody's doing. Hope everybody's okay. So, my anatomy thesis project was on powerlifting, and on the first slide you can see two pictures of the same powerlifter. The picture on the left kind of represents how it's an intense thing, and sometimes things go wrong. And the right is like what the goal is, and so we'll start off with the history, background, and facts. So on the next slide, you could see just a quick picture and some information I put on the slide. Here we just have like a really old picture just to represent like it's been around for a while. It's just kind of got modernized. So with the history of powerlifting, it began as an offshoot of Olympic weightlifting that focuses more on sheer strength and technique. There are three main exercises that they're called odd lifts because they're the variations of the technical terms. There's the deep knee bend, which is the squat that we know, the deadlift, and the bench press, which are pretty self-explanatory. Uh, the first national competition took place in 1965, and powerlifting, though beset by opinions about performance-enhancing drugs, became the prominent form of weightlifting in America since its official creation. So now onto some additional sports facts. It's a very anaerobic activity, meaning that it requires short bursts of energy rather than large intakes of oxygen, which would be aerobic. The duration is rather brief, which is as long as it takes to get the weights from point A to point B. And they need to have powerlifters. They need to have a larger than average caloric intake and amount of protein, which is a macronutrient. It allows them to build their muscle and repair their bodies after the really intense workouts that they're having. So now on to the next slide, which is about metabolic rates and nutrition. Here we have a picture of a guy, just typical, he's shredded and like has to eat a lot of food. And since a lot of ATP is needed, so they sweat a lot, and the use of the phosphagen system is important. The duration is so short that they're burning ATP really rapidly to get the weights from point A to point B. The principal reason people sweat is to release metabolic heat, and thus the stronger you get and more work you do, the more you sweat. So they're going to be sweating a fair amount, even if it's a short activity. And with the nutrition, powerlifters should consume higher than average amounts of the macronutrient protein. Like I said before, protein is made up of amino acids, which help build many of the essentials for powerlifting, including muscle and cartilage, as well as they facilitate many of the chemical reactions throughout the body. They should eat anywhere between 3,000 and 7,000 calories a day, depending on their workout, and almost 250 grams of protein, which is a very large amount. That being said, some supplements could be used, especially creatine and protein powder. Powerlifters should avoid sugar and processed food because those are inhibitors to just basic metabolism. All right, on to the next slide. We have primary motion and recovery. So, when lifting a large amount, there's a massive amount of stress on the bones and joints and all the small pieces within, like the ligaments and the cartilage. So in the three odd lifts of powerlifting, the knee, elbow, and shoulder are all joints that are the primary victim of this stress. While squatting, the knee, which is home to the ACL, MCL, LCL, and PCL, bends, and the quads, glutes, and abdominal muscles and obliques all work to move the weight. Similarly, in deadlifting, the knee bends, and the quads, glutes, hamstrings, and several upper back muscles even are involved. The bench press deals with more chest and shoulder and back and elbow, which are home to the RCL, UCL, AL, and THL, and they're given a lot of stress. And the muscles of the arm, chest, and back have to assist in getting the bar up. So when dealing with such an absurd amount of weight, if you break a bone, which isn't uncommon, just don't look videos up of it on YouTube. The recovery process is long and hard. So muscle atrophy is going to occur, which is like the breakdown of muscle because you're not using it as much. And for instance, if you have a humerus break, which is in your arm, you'll have to rest for a minimum of 12 weeks. And there's the process on the slide itself. I'm not going to go much into detail on that because it's not very specified into powerlifting, but it's a long process where the bone has to get a lot of blood and then recalcify and get the bone formed and hardened, which, if not done properly, could result in your arm being not the same length as it was before. But with powerlifting, sometimes you need plate insertion or rod inserted because you're putting so much stress on it. Sometimes the new bone can't handle it right away. And from personal reports from several fitness websites, I noticed that you have to basically start at like a quarter of what you were doing before. You have to start off very slow and rehab and focus on beginning to increase the range of motion and the strength in order to get back to where you were. Yeah, so basically, if you rest, you have a good attitude, and you don't push yourself too far. If you have proper load management, you should be good. Okay, so now on to the next slide. We're going to talk about all the connections that powerlifting has. The sensory connections. There's the proprioception from the parietal lobe. And as in any other sport, nearly every sense is being utilized, but in powerlifting, that sense is the most important. It involves muscles, tendons, and joints' ability to sense tension and force, pressure, and movement. Neurons in the parietal lobe respond to proprioceptors and determine where and how to respond to these impulses. The frequency indicates the intensity. So the more impulses there are, the more intense the reaction. So a lot of proprioceptors are being utilized to get this in powerlifting especially. Brain connections, the parietal lobe, like I said, is the most important. Localization of touch to minimize waste is really important because if you're wasting energy, you're going to run out, especially with powerlifting, because you're doing basically just max days all the time. So the parietal lobe deals with many things, including touch localization, and in this sense, it reacts to our proprioceptors and subsequently responds with force and pressure. Immense amount of pressures and force required, and therefore the parietal lobe has to localize this where you need the force. The muscle connections is just very simple. It's the sliding filament theory that we learned about, just like really intense. Like you're gonna be basically getting trying to get as isometric as you can before it becomes isotonic. So like until the muscles physically can't contract anymore, that's where you want to go. And acetylcholine is one of the neurotransmitters to get this contraction going. If you move on to the next slide, we see the primary systems involved, which are the cardiovascular, endocrine, and digestive system. The cardiovascular system shows that the oxygen expenditure is rather high for an anaerobic activity because you're breathing really hard and you need a lot of oxygen to balance out with the CO2, which is a byproduct of the ATP system. So when you're working out it's a pretty good cardio workout for an anaerobic exercise, what they came to the conclusion of in many studies. The endocrine system, in that system we have all the glands that secrete hormones, and the pituitary gland, which helps muscle growth, is one of the biggest ones, and the pancreas, which helps fuel. There's the adrenal gland, which is interesting because since it's such a heavy amount, it's like that fight or flight response is really important because you have to push your body to the limit. And the digestive system is going to be competing for blood flow to heal the muscles or to fuel your body. So a good diet is really essential. You need to make sure that you're getting enough proteins and enough fuel for the rest of your body to be able to function. And yes, that's the end of my project. Hope you guys learned a bunch. I learned a lot of this information from just a bunch of fitness journals and all that. So hope you guys are staying safe. Have a good one.